The champagne was Dom Pérignon. I know this because I watched the bottle rotate on the conference table like a lazy Susan of irony while 23 people applauded an idea I'd had in my bathtub on a Sunday night in March. The applause was for Connor Bellamy, 24 years old, jawline like a geometry proof, nephew of a man who once golfed with our CEO in Cabo. Connor was holding a clicker for a presentation he didn't build, standing in front of a mood board he didn't design, pitching a campaign framework he couldn't explain if you held a thesaurus to his head. And he was winning. He was winning the room, winning the client, winning the $3.2 million Lionsgate experiential account that I had spent 4 months developing in documents Connor had never opened because Connor doesn't open documents. Connor vibes with the energy and riffs on the creative. Connor once asked me what a deliverable was. I told him it was a type of cheese. He believed me for 2 days. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Or behind myself. Both, actually, because this story only makes sense if I tell it from 2 directions at once. The version of me sitting in that conference room watching my work get stolen in real time, and the version of me 11 months later. Sitting in a different room entirely, reading the most satisfying email of my professional life. Those 2 versions of me are connected by a thread of theft, humiliation, and one resignation letter that, according to my LinkedIn analytics, has been viewed 2.7 million times. My name is Nadia Sorokin. I'm 36. For 5 years, I was a senior creative producer at Pinnacle Narrative Group, a mid-major entertainment marketing firm in Culver City, Los Angeles. If you've seen a movie trailer that made you feel something unexpected, dread during a comedy promo, warmth during a horror teaser, there's a reasonable chance I had something to do with it. Not a certainty. I'm not delusional, but a reasonable chance. Let me tell you what I built at Pinnacle because nobody else is going to. I developed the Emotional Displacement framework, a proprietary approach to experiential marketing that deliberately mismatches audience expectations with sensory environments to create memorable brand moments. Sounds like jargon. It's not. It's the reason Pinnacle landed the A24 experiential campaign in 2021, a $1.8 million contract that turned a parking garage in downtown LA into a sensory deprivation experience for a horror film premiere. For 100 attendees. A 94% social media share rate. Coverage in Adweek, The Wrap, and Variety. The client sent a handwritten note to the office afterward. It was addressed to the Pinnacle team. I was the Pinnacle team. Me, my laptop, and a mood board application I'd customized so heavily that the original developers wouldn't recognize it. I also built Pinnacle's relationship with Netflix's experiential division, a connection that started with a cold email I sent at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday and grew into a $4.6 million annual retainer over 3 years. I personally managed the Paramount immersive campaign for their 2022 slate, 14 events across 6 cities, $2.1 million budget, delivered 11% under cost. I mentored 9 junior producers, 4 of whom are now at agencies that would make Pinnacle nervous. And I did all of this while reporting to a man who once described my work as the stuff Nadia does in the background during a company all-hands. That man is Julian Cross, my manager. Age 43. Brown hair that's always slightly too long in a way that suggests artistic temperament rather than negligence. Julian wears linen blazers in January and says things like, "Let's pressure test the narrative," when he means, "I haven't read your brief yet." He has a genuine talent. I want to be fair about this, for reading a room. Julian can walk into a client meeting with 0 preparation and leave with everyone feeling heard, validated, and excited. He's a thermostat. He adjusts the temperature of any space he enters. It's a real skill. I've watched it work on skeptical clients, hostile board members, and a catering manager who is about to quit mid-event. The problem with Julian is that thermostats don't generate heat. They just regulate what someone else produces. And for 5 years, I was the furnace. I didn't mind at first. I genuinely didn't. I'm not someone who needs applause, I need the work to be good. My mother is a retired structural engineer from Kiev who immigrated to Sacramento in 1994 and spent 30 years making sure buildings didn't fall down. Nobody applauds a building for not falling down. You just notice when it does. I inherited that orientation. I build things. I make them hold. If someone else stands in front of them and takes a photo, fine. The building doesn't care. But buildings also don't have rent, or student loans, or a performance review system that ties bonuses to visibility metrics, a term Pinnacle introduced in 2022 that essentially meant, if leadership doesn't see you doing it, it didn't happen. My visibility was low because my work happened in documents, in late-night client calls, in production schedules that nobody reads until something goes wrong. Julian's visibility was high because Julian was always in the room, always presenting, always the face. The year I landed the Netflix retainer, $4.6 million, the single largest client acquisition in Pinnacle's history, Julian received the company's Rainmaker Award at the annual gala. He gave a speech. He thanked his team. He did not say my name. I was at table 9, between a junior coordinator who'd been at the company for 3 weeks and an empty chair that was supposed to be occupied by someone from accounting who'd called in sick. I ate a bread roll and watched Julian hold a crystal trophy shaped like a lightning bolt, and I thought, this is fine. This is how it works. The building doesn't need a trophy. That was the before version of me. Patient. Philosophical. Convinced that the work would eventually speak for itself, because my mother's buildings always did. The after version of me, the one writing this, knows that buildings don't speak. People speak. And if you don't speak for your own work, someone else will speak over it. Now let me introduce you to Connor Bellamy. Connor arrived at Pinnacle in January 2023 as a creative strategy intern, a title that had never existed before his arrival and was created, I later learned, after a phone call between our CEO, Richard Tanaka, and Connor's uncle, a man named Douglas Bellamy, who ran a talent management firm that occasionally referred clients to Pinnacle. Connor was 23 at the time. He'd graduated from USC 8 months earlier with a degree in communications and a minor in, I swear I'm not making this up, narrative entrepreneurship. I didn't know that was a discipline. I still don't think it is. Connor was not stupid. I want to be precise about that because the story is better and worse if you understand that he wasn't some bumbling fail-son who couldn't find the printer. Connor was socially intelligent, genuinely charismatic, and had the specific confidence of someone who has never been in a room where he wasn't welcome. He remembered names. He asked questions that sounded insightful even when they weren't. He wore sneakers that cost more than my car payment and somehow made that seem approachable rather than obscene. What Connor was not, in any measurable sense, was a creative producer. He had no portfolio, no client experience, no understanding of production timelines, vendor management, budget reconciliation, or the 17 other unglamorous competencies that separate a creative person from someone who can actually execute a campaign. He was a mood, a vibe, a walking Pinterest board with a trust fund. Julian loved him immediately. Within 2 weeks, Connor was sitting in on client calls. Within a month, he was attending pitch meetings. Within 3 months, Julian had promoted him from intern to junior creative strategist, another invented title, with a salary that, according to a payroll document I saw by accident when a printer jammed and spit out the wrong file, was $74,000. I'd started at Pinnacle at $61,000 and hadn't hit $74,000 until my 3rd year, after landing the A24 account. I noticed. I filed it. The building doesn't care, I told myself. The building doesn't care. But the building was about to start caring, because what happened next wasn't just favoritism. It was theft. Specific, documented, repeated theft of creative work, my creative work, laundered through Julian's approval and deposited into Connor's portfolio like intellectual property was a checking account and I was an ATM with no withdrawal limit. The first time it happened, I almost missed it. It was April 2023. I'd been developing a pitch for a potential Lionsgate experiential partnership, an immersive campaign tied to their horror slate for the fall. I'd spent 4 months on it. The concept was called Threshold, a multi-city pop-up experience that used biometric feedback to customize each attendee's journey through a physical space. Heart rate, skin conductance, micro-expressions captured by ambient sensors, The environment would literally respond to your fear. I'd built the technical framework with a vendor I'd cultivated for 2 years, a biometrics firm in San Jose called SensorFrame. I'd created a 47-page pitch deck. I'd modeled the budget at $3.2 million with a projected ROI that would make Lionsgate's experiential team weep with joy. I submitted the deck to Julian on April 14th for review. He said he'd dig into it over the weekend. On April 22nd, 8 days later, I walked past the glass-walled conference room on the 3rd floor and saw Connor standing at the screen, clicking through a presentation I recognized instantly. My color palette, my layout structure, my concept threshold, renamed Liminal, with the same biometric framework, the same multi-city rollout, the same sensor frame integration, the same 47 pages, reformatted with Connor's name in the author field. Julian was in the room. Smiling, nodding, adjusting the thermostat. I stood in the hallway for 11 seconds. I counted them. 11 seconds of looking through that glass wall at my work wearing someone else's name, and I felt something shift in my chest, not anger, not yet, but the specific sensation of a load-bearing wall developing its first crack. If you've ever watched someone else get credit for the thing that cost you your weekends, your sleep, your creative soul, if you've ever stood on the wrong side of a glass wall and seen your own work reflected back at you with a stranger's name on it, then you already know what that crack feels like. And you know it doesn't heal. It just gets louder. Stay with me. Subscribe now, because what I did with that crack, how I turned it into a door, is the reason 2.7 million people have read my resignation letter. And we haven't even gotten to the good part yet. Let me cut forward. 11 months after that hallway moment, after everything I'm about to tell you, I'm sitting in a cafe in Silver Lake called Botanica, the kind of place that serves a $12 oat milk latte in a handmade ceramic cup and doesn't apologize for it. I'm reading an email from the head of experiential marketing at Netflix. Her name is Diane Okoro, and the email is 3 sentences long. Nadia, we've formally notified Pinnacle that we're terminating our retainer effective end of quarter. We'd like to discuss a direct engagement with you. Call me when you're ready. For $0.6 million. The retainer I built. Walking out the door behind me. But that's the after. Let me take you back to the before, because the space between that hallway crack and that Silver Lake email is where the real story lives. After I saw Connor presenting my threshold deck, sorry, Liminal, I did what any rational, self-respecting professional would do. I went to the bathroom, locked myself in the 3rd stall, and sat on a closed toilet lid for 7 minutes doing breathing exercises I'd learned from a YouTube video about managing workplace panic attacks. The irony of learning coping mechanisms from YouTube while my career was being disassembled in a glass conference room was not lost on me. Irony is never lost on me. It's my primary currency at this point. Then I went back to my desk and opened Slack. I messaged Julian. Hey, saw Connor presenting the Lionsgate experiential concept. That's the threshold deck I sent you on the 14th. Want to make sure we're aligned on attribution. Diplomatic. Professional. The kind of message my mother would approve of, structural, load-bearing, no unnecessary ornamentation. Julian responded 40 minutes later. Hey. Yeah, Connor's been developing some really exciting ideas in that space. I think there's some natural overlap with your earlier thinking, which is great. Means we're all aligned creatively. Let's sync next week, thumbs up. Natural overlap. With my earlier thinking. 47 pages of natural overlap, down to the vendor integration specs and the budget line items. Connor had independently arrived at the same biometric framework, the same city rollout sequence, the same font choices. A creative miracle. A spontaneous generation of identical intellectual property, like 2 people on opposite sides of the planet simultaneously inventing the telephone, except one of them had access to the other's filing cabinet. I screenshot the message. I saved it to a folder on my personal drive that I'd labeled, with the dark humor of someone who knows where this is going, insurance. Now, cut forward again. 7 months later. I'm in a different bathroom. Not the Pinnacle 3rd floor stall. This one is in the Shutters Hotel in Santa Monica, during an industry mixer hosted by the Entertainment Marketing Association. I'm standing at the sink, reapplying lipstick I don't need because I'm stalling, and a woman walks in. Margot Ellison, VP of Brand Partnerships at Lionsgate. The client. The person whose $3.2 million account was about to be won by my stolen concept. Margot and I had met twice before, once at a Pinnacle Capabilities presentation I'd led in 2022, and once at a wrap party for the Paramount immersive series. She remembered me. This is relevant. Nadia Sorokin, she said, checking her reflection with the efficient vanity of someone who attends 4 events a week. I keep meaning to email you. That liminal concept your team pitched, the biometric responsive environment, that's your fingerprint all over it. I paused, lipstick hovering. What makes you say that? Because I sat in your Paramount debrief 2 years ago and you spent 20 minutes explaining emotional displacement theory. Liminal is emotional displacement with a tech layer. It's obviously yours. She turned to face me. So why is that kid presenting it? That kid. Margot Ellison, a woman who controlled a $14 million experiential budget, had looked at Connor Bellamy's presentation and seen through it in the time it took to check her eyeliner. Politics, I said, which was the truest single word I could offer. Margot studied me for a moment. She had the expression of someone doing math they didn't enjoy. Nadia, I'm going to say something that's probably not my place. The concept is strong. We're likely going to greenlight it. But I want you to know that when I greenlight it, I'm greenlighting your work. And if at any point you're somewhere else and want to bring that work with you, call me. She left. I stood at that sink for another 2 minutes, holding a lipstick I'd forgotten about, feeling something rearrange itself in my chest. Not the crack this time. Something new. A hinge. But I'm jumping around. Let me go back to the before, to the months between the first theft and the Shutter's bathroom, because that's where the pattern became undeniable. After the threshold to liminal conversion, I watched. Carefully. With the attention of someone who now understood the game, but hadn't yet decided whether to play it or burn the board. May 2023. I developed a concept for an interactive social media campaign tied to a streaming platform's summer slate, a Choose Your Nightmare, branching narrative experience across Instagram and TikTok. Estimated engagement, 12 million impressions. I submitted the brief to Julian on May 8th. On May 19th, Connor presented a nearly identical concept in the weekly creative review, rebranded as Fork in the Dark. Julian called it fresh thinking. I sat 3 chairs away, watching my fresh thinking get attributed to someone who thought a deliverable was a cheese. June 2023. I built a pitch for an immersive dining experience tied to a food-focused streaming series, a 12-course meal where each course corresponded to an episode, with synchronized lighting, sound design, and scent diffusion. Budget, $890,000. Projected media value, $2.4 million. I sent the deck to Julian on June 3rd. On June 12th, Connor walked into a client pre-meeting with the concept reformatted under the title, Taste the Story. Same 12 courses. Same scent diffusion vendor, a company called Olfact Lab that I had personally sourced and vetted over 3 months of conversations with their founder, a woman in Portland named Greta, who I'd bonded with over a shared hatred of artificial vanilla. 3 times in 3 months. The same mechanism each time. I submit to Julian marinates for 1 to 2 weeks. Connor presents a cosmetically altered version. Julian validates it publicly. I sit in a chair and feel the load-bearing wall crack a little wider. I started keeping a detailed log. Dates, file metadata, email timestamps, Slack messages. Every submission I made to Julian, I BCC'd my personal email. Every document, I embedded invisible metadata tags, a trick I'd learned from a designer friend, that timestamped my authorship in the file's properties even if someone changed the visible author field. Connor, bless his narrative entrepreneurship degree, did not know that PDFs have metadata. Connor thought PDFs were just fancy printouts. The insurance folder grew. By August, it contained 43 files. Now let me tell you about the person who almost made me stop. Ren Matsuda was Pinnacle's creative director, Julian's peer, not his superior, but occupying a parallel lane with enough institutional weight to matter. Ren was 47, had been at Pinnacle for 9 years, and possessed the rare combination of genuine creative talent and complete allergic reaction to office politics. He wore the same rotation of 4 black t-shirts. He ate lunch at his desk every day, always a sandwich from the same deli, always turkey, always with an aggressive amount of mustard. He spoke in short, definitive sentences and had once ended a 3-hour brainstorm by saying, "This is all bad. Start over." Everyone respected him. Some people were terrified of him. I was both. In July, Ren stopped by my desk at 6:40 p.m. on a Wednesday. The office was mostly empty. He stood there for a moment, not saying anything, which was standard Ren. He treated silence like a tool, not an absence. "The dining concept," he said. "Taste the story. That's yours." It wasn't a question. "What makes you say that?" I asked, echoing what I'd later say to Margot, because apparently that was my default response to people identifying my stolen work, deflection disguised as curiosity. Because Connor Bellamy doesn't know what centrifusion is. I asked him after the presentation. He said it was like those plug-in air fresheners, but for events. Ren's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "Nadia, what are you doing?" "I'm doing my job." "You're letting someone else do your job with your materials. That's different." I didn't respond. Ren waited. The silence stretched. The office hummed with the low-frequency drone of empty cubicles and sleeping monitors. "I can't prove it," I finally said. Which was a lie. I had 43 files that proved it, but I wasn't ready to show my hand. Not to Ren. Not to anyone. Because the silent architect in me believed, still, stubbornly, irrationally, that the work would eventually correct the record. That someone with authority would look at the output and trace it back to the source. That the building would be recognized by its engineer, not its photographer. Ren looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Buildings fall down when engineers stop maintaining them, Nadia. Don't let someone else's name on the blueprint make you forget you're the one keeping it standing." He walked away. I sat at my desk and thought about my mother, who had spent 30 years making sure buildings didn't fall down and had retired with a pension and a certificate of appreciation printed on cardstock. I thought about whether I wanted a certificate of appreciation. I thought about whether I wanted anything from Pinnacle at all anymore, or whether the wanting had been replaced by something harder and more useful. Cut forward. October 2023. The after timeline. I'm having dinner with Tomas Herrera, a freelance experiential producer I'd worked with on the Paramount campaign. Tomas was 51, had been in the industry for 25 years, and had the weathered calm of someone who'd seen every version of corporate dysfunction and had stopped being surprised by any of them. He was also, crucially, connected to every major client in the Los Angeles entertainment marketing ecosystem. Not through schmoozing, through reliability. Tomas delivered. People remembered. "I heard Pinnacle's pitching Lionsgate next month," he said, twirling pasta with the focus of a man who takes carbohydrates seriously. "The biometric thing. Connor Bellamy's presenting." "He is." "Nadia." Tomas set down his fork. "That's your concept. Everyone knows it's your concept. Margot Ellison knows. I know. Diane at Netflix knows. She asked me last week if you were still at Pinnacle because she wants to renegotiate the retainer terms, and she specifically wants you in the room." Diane said that? Diane said, and I quote, "I don't care about Pinnacle's org chart. Nadia built this relationship. If Nadia leaves, I'm reconsidering our engagement." End quote. I set down my wine glass. A $16 Tempranillo that suddenly tasted like leverage. "Tomas, how many clients have said something like that to you? About me specifically?" He thought about it. Counted on his fingers, which I found endearing from a man who managed 7-figure production budgets. Diane at Netflix. Margot at Lionsgate, though she's more cautious about saying it directly. Phil Reeves at Amazon Studios, definitely. He told me after the Prime Video launch event that you were the only producer he'd ever worked with who understood the difference between spectacle and experience. And Yuki Tanabe at Sony, she asked for you by name for the Spider-Verse activation and was told you were unavailable, which she interpreted correctly as being hidden. For clients. For relationships I'd built personally, over years. through work that had my invisible fingerprints all over it. Combined annual value to Pinnacle. I did the math later that night on my couch, using a spreadsheet I probably should have built months earlier. Netflix retainer, $4.6 million. Lionsgate potential, $3.2 million. Amazon Studios recurring, $1.8 million. Sony project-based, approximately $1.1 million annually. Total, $10.7 million. Pinnacle's entire annual revenue was $31 million. I was personally responsible for relationships representing 34.5% of it. 34.5%. Sitting at a desk in a back corner of the third floor, watching a 24-year-old present my work in rooms I wasn't invited to. The building was starting to care. But here's the moment I need to tell you about, the one where I almost lost the thread. Where the dark humor dried up and what was underneath wasn't funny at all. November 2023. Annual bonus announcements. Pinnacle distributed bonuses based on creative contribution scores, a metric that was theoretically objective and practically whatever Julian decided it was. My score, 6.2 out of 10. Connor's score, 8.7. The difference translated to $4,300 for me and $11,200 for Connor. For my work. Performed by me. Attributed to him. Compensated accordingly. I went home that night and I didn't do breathing exercises. I didn't screenshot anything. I didn't add to the insurance folder. I sat on my kitchen floor, not metaphorically, literally on the linoleum, back against the dishwasher, and I called my mother. Mama, I think I might be going crazy. She listened. She always listens first. It's an engineering habit, she says. Assess the structure before you intervene. You're not crazy, she said, in the voice she uses when she's about to say something that sounds simple and isn't. You're just learning that some buildings aren't worth maintaining. The question is whether you want to renovate or demolish. What if I can't do either? What if I just have to keep standing inside it? Silence. Then, Nadia, no one has to stand inside a building they know is unsafe. That's not loyalty. That's a code violation. I laughed. A wet, ugly laugh. The kind that's adjacent to crying and knows it. My mother, the structural engineer, had just compared my career to a code violation. She wasn't wrong. That night, I opened the insurance folder. 43 files had become 61. Timestamps, metadata, email chains, Slack screenshots, the payroll document from the printer jam, Connor's bonus score, my bonus score, the Lionsgate deck comparison showing identical content with different author names. I looked at it all, spread across my laptop screen like evidence in a case I hadn't yet decided to prosecute. And I started writing. Not the resignation letter. That came later. I started writing a timeline. A clean, chronological, annotated record of every stolen concept, every misattributed presentation, every bonus dollar that flowed from my brain through Julian's laundering operation into Connor's bank account. I wrote it the way my mother would build a structural report, factual, precise, load-bearing. No adjectives that couldn't be verified. No emotions that couldn't be timestamped. The document was 19 pages when I finished. I saved it to the insurance folder and renamed the folder. It wasn't insurance anymore. I called it demolition. If you've ever sat on a kitchen floor and realized that the thing you've been protecting doesn't deserve your protection, if you've ever felt the exact moment when loyalty curdles into something sharper and more honest, then you know why I need you to subscribe right now. Because what happened next, in that Lionsgate pitch meeting with the Dom Pérignon and the 23 people applauding, is the moment the before and after timelines finally collide. And I promise you, the collision is spectacular. But first, I need to tell you about the conversation I had with Julian Cross 3 days before that meeting. The one where he looked me in the eye and said something so perfectly, absurdly revealing that I almost thanked him for it. Almost. 3 days before the Lionsgate pitch meeting, Julian called me into his office. Not a Slack message. Not a calendar invite. He walked to my desk, the back corner, third floor, next to the emergency exit that I'd started thinking of as symbolic, and said, "Got a minute?" Julian's office had a window that faced the Culver City parking structure. He'd positioned his desk so that during video calls, the light hit him from the left, which he'd once told me was the cinematographer's angle. This is a real thing he said to me with his real mouth. I sat in the chair across from him, the low chair, the one that put visitors about 4 inches below his eye line, a power positioning trick so obvious it was almost charming. Nadia, I want to talk about the Lionsgate pitch. Okay, Connor is going to present. You know that. But I want you in the room. Supporting role. Technical questions, vendor details, anything granular that comes up. You're the depth. Connor's the energy. I'm the depth. Connor's the energy. I was being asked to sit in a room and provide live technical support for a 24-year-old presenting my stolen work to a client who already knew it was my stolen work, so that when Margot Ellison asked a question about biometric sensor calibration, Connor wouldn't have to admit he thought biometrics was a type of yoga. Julian, I said, and I kept my voice level because the silent architect doesn't raise her voice. She just stops holding things up. I want to make sure I understand. You want me in the room as backup for a concept I developed that Connor is presenting under his name, and my role is to answer the questions he can't. Julian did the thing he always does when confronted with a direct statement. He softened. His shoulders dropped half an inch. His head tilted. The thermostat adjusting. Nadia, I know you feel ownership over some of these ideas, and I respect that. But creative work at Pinnacle is collaborative. Connor brought his own perspective to the concept. He elevated it. That's how teams work. What perspective did Connor bring, specifically? A pause. Julian's eyes moved to the left, not the cinematographer's angle, the cognitive recall direction, the one people look toward when they're constructing rather than remembering. He brought the energy, the presentation style, the client-facing polish. So he brought the font. Julian's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. That's reductive, Nadia. Julian, I have the original deck with my metadata timestamps. I have the email where I sent it to you on April 14th. I have Connor's version with the author field changed and the creation date 11 days after mine. I'm not asking for credit because I feel ownership. I'm asking because I have receipts. The room got very quiet. Julian looked at me, and for the first time in 5 years, I saw something behind the thermostat, a flicker of calculation, cold and fast, like a card counter realizing the deck has shifted. Nadia, he said slowly, I think you're reading too much into process. Decks get shared. Ideas evolve. If you want, I can make sure you get a co-credit on the Lionsgate pitch. Would that help? A co-credit. On my own work. Shared with someone who thought a deliverable was a cheese. Julian Cross, in his cinematographer's lighting, was offering me half of something that was entirely mine and framing it as generosity. That would be great, I said. Thank you, Julian. I left his office. I went to my desk. I opened the demolition folder and added a new file, a transcript of the conversation I'd just had, written from memory within 4 minutes while the words were still sharp. I also noted the date, the time, and the fact that Julian had offered co-credit, an implicit admission that the work was mine to begin with. You don't offer to share credit for something that was never stolen. Then I sent 3 emails. One to Tomas Herrera. One to Diane Okoro at Netflix. One to Margot Ellison at Lionsgate. Each email was different in tone but identical in substance, a brief, professional note expressing my interest in exploring independent opportunities and my availability for a conversation at their convenience. I didn't CC anyone. I didn't BCC my personal email. These emails went from my personal Gmail, not my Pinnacle account. Because the building had stopped being my building. I was just still standing inside it, waiting for the right moment to walk out the door. The Lionsgate pitch meeting was on a Tuesday, November 14th, 2023. Conference room 4A, the big one, the one with the walnut table and the built-in screen and the espresso machine that cost more than my first car. 23 people. Margot Ellison and her team of 4 from Lionsgate. Richard Tanaka, Pinnacle CEO, who attended major pitches the way a landlord attends building inspections, present but not useful. Julian. Connor. Me, in my supporting role, sitting at the far end of the table with a laptop open to the technical specs in case anyone asked about sensor calibration frequencies. and the Dom Pérignon. Premature, in my opinion. You don't pop champagne before the client says yes. But Julian had decided the bottle's presence communicated confidence, which is the kind of strategic thinking you develop when your primary skill is adjusting room temperature. Connor presented. I'll give him this, he was good at presenting. The energy, as Julian would say. He moved well. He made eye contact. He used his hands in ways that suggested passion rather than nervousness. He hit every beat of the deck, my deck, with the fluency of someone who'd rehearsed extensively, which he had, because Julian had spent 3 days coaching him while I sat at my back corner desk doing actual work. The concept landed. I could see it on Margot's face, not surprise, because she'd already told me in a Santa Monica bathroom that she knew the work was mine, but professional appreciation. The biometric framework was strong. The multi-city rollout was logistically sound. The budget was tight. It was a good pitch because it was good work, and it was good work because I'd spent 4 months building it in documents that Connor had never opened. Margot asked one question. Just one. Can you walk me through the sensor frame integration timeline? Specifically the calibration protocol for the biometric sensors in a multi-venue deployment. Connor's smile held for exactly 2 seconds before his eyes slid toward me. The geometry-proof jawline didn't falter, but something behind it did. A micro-expression of someone reaching for a shelf and finding it empty. Nadia, do you want to take that one? Julian said, smooth as silk, as if this had been the plan all along, as if my entire role in this company was to be the emergency generator that kicks on when the main power fails. I took it. I answered Margot's question with the precision of someone who'd personally negotiated the sensor frame contract, because I had. I explained the calibration protocol, the venue-specific adaptation requirements, the data privacy framework I'd built to comply with California's biometric information laws. I spoke for 4 minutes. When I finished, Margot nodded and said, "That's exactly what I needed to hear." She was looking at me when she said it. Not at Connor. Not at Julian. At me. Lionsgate greenlit the project. $3.2 million. The room applauded. The Dom Pérignon was opened. Connor shook hands with Margot. Julian beamed. Richard Tanaka said something about the pinnacle difference. I drank a glass of champagne that tasted like someone else's celebration, and I smiled, because the silent architect was still smiling in the before timeline. The after timeline, the one where I was already composing emails to clients from my personal Gmail, that version of me was doing something else entirely. She was counting down. Here's what people don't understand about the long game. It's not dramatic. It's not a single explosive moment. It's erosion. It's the slow, patient removal of load-bearing elements until the structure can no longer support its own weight. My mother would understand. You don't demolish a building with a wrecking ball if you want to control where the debris falls. You remove the supports, one by one, and you let gravity do the rest. I didn't quit after the Lionsgate meeting. That would have been satisfying, but premature. Instead, I spent the next 3 months doing something far more effective. I became indispensable and invisible simultaneously. I continued doing my work flawlessly, meticulously, without complaint. I answered Connor's questions when he had them, which was often. I supported Julian's presentations with technical depth he couldn't generate on his own. I maintained every client relationship with the warmth and reliability that had built those relationships in the first place. And quietly, on my own time, I built something else. I registered an LLC in January 2024. Sorokin Creative. I didn't tell anyone at Pinnacle. I didn't post about it on LinkedIn. I filed the paperwork, set up a business bank account, and built a website that I didn't publish. I had conversations, careful, exploratory, always initiated by the other party, with Diane Okoro at Netflix, with Margot Ellison at Lionsgate, with Phil Reeves at Amazon Studios, with Yuki Tanabe at Sony. I didn't solicit business. I didn't badmouth Pinnacle. I simply made myself available, as a human being, for coffee and conversation, and I let the relationships I'd built over 5 years do what relationships do when they're real. They followed the person, not the logo. Tomas Herrera became my unofficial advisor. Over pasta dinners that grew increasingly strategic, he helped me map the landscape. You don't need all of them at once, he said. twirling linguini with the gravitas of a man planning a military campaign. You need one. One client who signs with you directly. The rest will follow because the industry is smaller than people think and everyone talks. Ran Matsuda, meanwhile, did something I didn't expect. In February 2024, he resigned from Pinnacle. No drama, no announcement, he simply gave his 2 weeks and left. He told me on his last day, standing by my desk at 6:15 p.m. with his jacket already on, "I'm going independent. Consulting. If you ever need a creative director who doesn't steal other people's work, you know where to find me." Ren, are you offering to work with me? I'm offering to work with someone who does the work. You happen to be that person. He paused. Also, I'm tired of watching Julian take credit for things. It's exhausting, and I don't even like you that much. I laughed. Ren almost smiled, which for Ren was the equivalent of a standing ovation. March 2024. I wrote the letter. Not in anger. Not on a kitchen floor. I wrote it at my dining table on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee from a mug my mother had given me that said structurally sound, an engineering joke that only she found funny. I wrote it in the voice I'd been developing for 5 years without knowing it, precise, factual, darkly amused, and absolutely devastating. The letter was 2,200 words. It was addressed to Richard Tanaka, CC'd to Pinnacle's entire leadership team, the HR director, and, this was the part that mattered, the general counsel. It was not a resignation letter. Not yet. It was a formal complaint. It detailed, with dates, timestamps, metadata evidence, and file comparisons, the systematic appropriation of my creative work by Julian Cross and its attribution to Connor Bellamy. It included the bonus disparity, my $4,300 versus Connor's $11,200 for identical work. It included the payroll document showing Connor's starting salary exceeding my third-year compensation. It included Julian's Slack message about natural overlap. It included his verbal offer of co-credit, the implicit admission. 19 pages of supporting documentation attached as a single PDF with a table of contents. I submitted it on a Monday morning. Then I waited. Pinnacle's response was, and I mean this with every ounce of dark humor I possess, exactly what you'd expect from a company that had allowed this to happen in the first place. HR scheduled a meeting. The meeting was with Julian's supervisor, the COO, a woman named Patricia Langford who had been at Pinnacle for 12 years and whose primary management philosophy appeared to be, if I don't acknowledge the problem doesn't exist. Patricia listened to my summary. She reviewed the documentation. She said, and I wrote this down immediately afterward, "Nadia, I can see how this situation might feel frustrating, but creative attribution in a collaborative environment is inherently subjective. I think the best path forward is a mediated conversation between you and Julian to align on expectations." A mediated conversation. To align on expectations. About theft. I nodded. I thanked Patricia. I went back to my desk. And I submitted my resignation, effective in 2 weeks, on April 1st, 2024. April Fool's Day. The irony was accidental, but I chose not to correct it. But the resignation letter, the real one, the one that 2.7 million people have read, that wasn't the formal HR document. That was a separate piece of writing. I published it on LinkedIn on my last day at Pinnacle, April 15th, 2024. Tax day. Another accidental irony. The universe was apparently in a comedic mood. The LinkedIn post was 1,800 words. It did not name Pinnacle directly. My lawyer, a woman named Sandra Chin whom Tomas had connected me with, advised against it for legal reasons. But it described, in specific and verifiable detail, the experience of having creative work systematically stolen by a manager and attributed to a less qualified colleague. It included anonymized but recognizable details, the biometric campaign, the dining concept, the social media branching narrative. It described the bonus disparity, the invented job titles, the co-credit offer. It described sitting in a conference room watching someone else present your work while you're positioned as technical support. And it ended with a line that I wrote at 2 a.m. and almost deleted 6 times before deciding it was exactly right. I spent 5 years being the depth. I'm done being someone else's energy. The post went up at 8 a.m. on a Monday. By noon, it had 40,000 views. By Wednesday, 400,000. By the following Monday, February 7th, million. It was shared by Adweek, picked up by a reporter at The Wrap who'd covered the A24 campaign and remembered my name, and discussed in a LinkedIn comment thread that grew to over 3,400 responses, many from people in entertainment marketing who had either witnessed similar dynamics or experienced them firsthand. I did not name Julian. I did not name Connor. I did not name Pinnacle. I didn't have to. The industry is smaller than people think, and everyone talks. Within 48 hours of the post going live, I received a call from Margot Ellison. Lionsgate was re-evaluating its relationship with Pinnacle. Not because of my post, officially, but because of concerns about creative leadership continuity. The $3.2 million liminal project, my threshold concept wearing Connor's name, was put on hold pending the re-evaluation. Within a week, Diane O'Caro at Netflix sent the email I read in that Silver Lake cafe. The $4.6 million retainer terminated. Diane wanted to work with me directly. Within a month, Phil Reeves at Amazon Studios had quietly redirected 2 upcoming projects, combined value $1.4 million, away from Pinnacle and toward independent producers, with a strong suggestion that I be involved. I didn't orchestrate this. I want to be clear about that. I didn't call these people and ask them to pull their business. I didn't leverage the relationships as weapons. What I did was simpler and, in the long run, more effective. I removed myself from the equation and let the equation rebalance. The clients had always been connected to me, not to Pinnacle's logo. When I left, the connection stretched, thinned, and eventually snapped, not because I pulled them, but because there was nothing on the other end holding them anymore. Connor couldn't hold them. Julian couldn't hold them. The thermostat can't keep the room warm if the furnace walks out. Pinnacle lost $9.8 million in client revenue within 6 months of my departure. I know this because Tomas told me, who heard it from a former Pinnacle account manager who'd also left, who'd seen the quarterly report before walking out the door. $9.8 million. 31.6% of their annual revenue. Almost exactly the percentage I'd calculated on my couch that night, 34.5%, minus a few accounts that stayed out of contractual obligation rather than loyalty. Julian Cross was not fired. This is important. In the stories people tell about corporate revenge, the villain always gets fired, escorted out by security, humiliated in front of the office. That's not what happened. What happened was slower and, I think, worse. Julian was restructured into a reduced role, senior producer, no direct reports, no client-facing responsibilities. The thermostat was moved to a room where there was nothing to regulate. He's still at Pinnacle as far as I know. Still wearing linen blazers. Still saying, let's pressure test the narrative. But the narrative doesn't include him anymore. Connor Bellamy left Pinnacle in June 2024, 2 months after I did. He moved to a smaller agency in Santa Monica. I don't know what he's doing there. I don't think about him much. Connor was never the villain of this story. He was the vehicle. A charming, well-connected, geometry-jawed vehicle for someone else's theft. I suspect he knows that now. I suspect he knew it then on some level, in the way that people who benefit from systems they didn't build always sort of know. Richard Tanaka, Pinnacle CEO, sent me a LinkedIn message 4 months after my post. It said, Nadia, I wish we'd handled things differently. You were a tremendous asset to this organization. I did not respond. Asset is a word for things you own, and I was never his to own. Patricia Langford, the COO who suggested a mediated conversation, left Pinnacle in September 2024. I heard she went to a nonprofit. I hope the nonprofit has better HR. Now let me tell you where I am. It's March 2026. Sorokin Creative is 2 years old. We are a 5-person experiential marketing studio based in Los Angeles. Our clients include Netflix, Lionsgate, Amazon Studios, Sony Pictures, and, as of January, A24, who came back to me directly after their Pinnacle contract expired. Annual revenue last year, $7.3 million. Not $31 million. Not Pinnacle-sized. But $7.3 million that is entirely, verifiably, documentably mine. Ran Matsuda is my creative director. He still wears the same 4 black t-shirts. He still eats turkey sandwiches with an aggressive amount of mustard. He told me last week that working with me is acceptable, which I have framed and hung on my office wall. Tomas Herrera is a senior advisor and occasional collaborator. He still twirls pasta like he's defusing a bomb. He brought me the A24 reconnection, which he describes as returning stolen property to its rightful owner, a phrase he's very proud of and has used at least 11 times. Margot Ellison Green lit the Threshold project, under its original name, with my original framework, in August 2024. It launched in 4 cities in October. Biometric responsive environments. Heart rate, skin conductance, micro-expressions. The environment responds to your fear. It was everything I designed on those Sunday nights in my bathtub, executed exactly as I'd envisioned. SensorFrame handled the tech integration. Greta, the founder in Portland who shares my hatred of artificial vanilla, sent me a bottle of real vanilla extract when the project wrapped. It's in my kitchen. I use it for pancakes. The Threshold campaign generated $6.1 million in media value for Lionsgate against a $3.2 million investment. A 91% social share rate. Coverage in Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, and a dedicated segment on a marketing podcast that called it the most innovative experiential activation of 2024. My name was on every document. My name was in every article. My name was the one Margot said when she introduced the project at Lionsgate's annual showcase. My mother visited my office last Thanksgiving. She walked through the space, a converted warehouse in Arts District, exposed brick, high ceilings, the kind of place that looks like it was designed by someone who cares about structure, and she ran her hand along the wall and said, "Good bones." "Thanks, Mama. The wall needs repointing in the southeast corner. You should call someone before the rainy season." She's a structural engineer. She can't help it. I want to tell you what I learned, but I don't want to tell you what you've already heard. I'm not going to say that the best revenge is success, because that's a refrigerator magnet, not wisdom. And I'm not going to tell you to know your worth, because you already know your worth. The problem was never self-knowledge. The problem was that someone else was cashing checks written in my handwriting, and the system was designed to let them. What I'll tell you instead is this. The long game isn't about patience. I hate patience. Patience is what people with power tell people without power to practice, while the power imbalance continues to benefit the people with power. The long game is about architecture. It's about understanding that you are a load-bearing structure in someone else's building, and that the most powerful thing you can do is not to fight for credit within that building, but to walk out of it and let physics do the rest. I didn't demolish Pinnacle. I didn't need to. I just left, and I took the load-bearing walls with me. The $9.8 million in lost revenue wasn't revenge. It was gravity. And the demolition folder, 61 files, 19-page timeline, metadata timestamps, Slack screenshots, bonus comparisons, I never used it. Not in a lawsuit. Not in a public expose. Sandra Chin, my lawyer, has it archived in case I ever need it, but I don't think I will. The documentation was never the weapon. It was the blueprint. It showed me the shape of what had been taken so I could rebuild it somewhere else, under my own name, with my own bones. Connor Bellamy, if you're watching this, and statistically, given 2.7 million views, there's a non-zero chance. I don't blame you. You were 23. You walked into a system that handed you things you hadn't earned and you took them, because that's what 23-year-olds do when the system is designed to reward them for showing up. But I hope you've learned, by now, the difference between energy and depth. Energy fills a room. Depth holds it up. You can't build a career on someone else's depth forever. Eventually, the room asks a question about biometric sensor calibration, and you have to look at the person sitting at the far end of the table and hope she's still willing to answer. I wasn't. Not anymore. Julian, I don't have a message for you. You already know. The thermostat knows when the furnace is gone. The room gets cold. That's not a metaphor. That's thermodynamics. One last thing. Remember the Dom Pérignon? The bottle rotating on the conference table while 23 people applauded? I bought a bottle last month. Same vintage. I opened it on the 2-year anniversary of Sorokin Creative in my arts district office with Ran and Tomas and my team of 5. Ran said it was adequate. Tomas said it paired well with the linguine he'd brought. I drank it slowly, from a glass that wasn't crystal, in a room that was entirely mine, and it tasted exactly the way champagne is supposed to taste when you're the one who earned it. Not like someone else's celebration. Like your own. If this story hit you somewhere, if you're sitting at a back corner desk right now, watching your work walk out of the room under someone else's name, I need you to do 2 things. First, open a folder on your personal drive. Call it whatever you want. Start documenting. Not because you're going to sue anyone. Because you need to see the shape of what's being taken so you know exactly what to rebuild when you leave. And second, share this video. Not for me, my story's already told. Share it for the person in your life who's still sitting in that conference room, smiling, drinking champagne that tastes like someone else's victory, who hasn't yet realized that the most powerful thing they can do is stand up, walk out, and let the building miss them. The building will miss them. Trust me, I'm an architect's daughter. I know how buildings work.